Alright, so welcome back. This is part 3 of Dominion Snowline. Remember, this is not an official expansion. These are cards that I created. And one thing to note is because they're cards I created, you can obviously tell these are different because there's no banner on the other side of the card. So that is something to note when you're playing with this expansion. You might know what you're going to get, maybe, to some extent when you're playing this game. Now, another thing I reintroduced into this expansion was I introduced some new split piles as well. And so Fur Coat and Log Cabin are part of a split pile, with this being on top and this being below. That means there's only 5 Fur Coats and there's only 5 Log Cabins. Now, another thing that's interesting about these two cards is they also interact with 2 event cards. And so when you play with Snowline, you must remember that if you're going to play random cards, that you should always randomize the kingdom cards first, because if you get Fur Coat as one of the piles, then you're always going to have these 2 events in the game, and that means you will not be randomly picking events to add. So that is something to always note. Now, each of these all of these here go well together, and there are benefits to having all of these here as well as these possibly as well. So, but some of them are harder to pull off than others. So let's go over them, starting with the Fur Coat, where it all gets started. So you get +2 treasure, and then you put this on your tavern mat. That's all you get for the action part of Fur Coat. I remember somebody saying that they got a Fur Coat once, a long time ago. Not necessarily a friend, just an acquaintance, said they bought a Fur Coat, and they pulled out some money that was sitting in the coat, because it was a used Fur Coat. So that's why I was like, +2 treasure. You never know, there could be a couple of coins sitting in your Fur Coat. So that's why I did that for that. Now, this is a tavern mat card, so directly after you finish playing an action card, except this. So obviously, if you put this on your tavern mat, you can't take this off of your tavern mat after playing the Fur Coat, which is why I made sure to say accept this. You may call this for +1 action, or when another player buys the event, the Blizzard event, you may discard this from your tavern mat and gain an action costing up to 5. And the setup is add a crisp day event. And so when you play with this card, the crisp day event will always be part of the setup. Now, let's go over that event next. Alright, now this is an event that costs 5, and it works with your journey token as well. So this is kind of cool. So your journey token starts face up. If it's face up, you gain a gold. If it's face down, you gain a silver, and you draw 2 cards for your next hand. So yeah, you might get a silver and be like, well, that doesn't sound that great. I don't really want a bunch of silvers, but at least you're also going to draw 2 extra cards for your next hand. So that's kind of cool, that with this card here, this event, the journey token is good whether it's face up or face down. Okay? And then if you notice, it also has setup, add the Blizzard event. Add the Fur Coat / Log Kingdom cards pile to the supply. So I also covered my basis. If you were to choose your events first, anyways, before you chose these, and this was the one that was chosen, you would have to play with this one too, this one, and these as well. Now, if that's the case, you choose these first, obviously Fur Coat and Log Cabin will not be part of the randomly 10 picked. So you could potentially have 11 kingdom cards in the supply. If you choose your events first, and this is the one you get, then you could potentially have 3 events, which obviously breaks the 2 limit rule when you have just 2 out, normally. Or 1 event and a landmark, etc., etc. Or 1 event and a way, etc., etc. Or a project, for that matter, from Renaissance, right? But this sort of breaks that rule if this is what you choose first randomly. If you choose these first randomly, then you get this, and you don't add an additional kingdom card to the supply. So that's one way of workaround in that regards. Now, what is Blizzard? Because it also adds the Blizzard event, right? Well, Blizzard is like an attack card, but it costs 12 money to purchase. So the chances of you getting this are slim, unless you have a ton of money. Sometimes it just works out that way when you have tons of money on your turns. Well, you gain a province. So you're like, why do I want to spend 12 money to gain a province? Well, because if you do, each other player may trash a log cabin from their hand. If they do, they gain a card costing up to 6. Now you're like, well, what's the point in that? I mean, why buy a Blizzard, gain a province, and then my opponents, they get to do something? If they have a log cabin, they get to trash it and gain a card costing up to 6, like a gold, for instance? Well, because now until a player buys a crisp day, no player can buy cards costing 5 or more. So this is like a duration, an everlasting duration event. Even though I don't have it in the color of duration, this is sort of like a duration event. You purchase this Blizzard, while this Blizzard is going on, no players can buy a card costing 5 or more. Hence, they cannot buy a province. So you gain your province, but then nobody else is going to be buying provinces until the next player purchases a crisp day event. So that is something to know. And here's the thing, because this is an event, you can purchase this. So you can still purchase events that cost more than 5, because this only affects buying cards. It does not affect the events. But if you want to buy something later down the road that's better than that's 5 or more, you're going to have to be the player that gets a crisp day. At least if you're the player that gets a crisp day, you could possibly get a gold out of the deal, or a silver and a couple extra cards. So there is at least some benefit to choosing a crisp day as your purchase. But do you want to be the player that sacrifices his turn when he could probably buy a province? Well, if you want to buy a province, eventually you're going to have to buy a crisp day. Now, other players could just wait. They could purchase other things costing less than 5 and wait until your next turn, and then you would have to purchase a crisp day if you wanted to get provinces again in the future. So this also, here's another thing to note. There is a downside to that. If the player just keeps getting tons of money, he can just keep going for Blizzard and keep purchasing it and gaining provinces that way. And so can everybody else. So it's not like impossible to gain a province. You would just have to spend a whole lot more than you would normally to get a province. So it doesn't prevent you completely from buying provinces. It just makes you work harder for it. So, regardless, somebody is going to have to buy this at some point if they want to buy things like gold, for instance. Or at least you can purchase this and maybe get a gold if it's face up, the journey token. So that's something to note. And because a Blizzard is in effect, if a player has a log cabin, they can trash it and from their hand and gain a card costing up to 6. So at least they get some benefit to when this is actually an event that goes into play. So it's an actual event that's taking place over a period of time. So that's kind of like thematic for an event. Now let's look at Log Cabin, because it's actually a victory card, and it's after the fur coat. So it costs 4. It's worth 2 victory points at the end of the game, so that's better than an estate, and it's got a really good action too. Maybe even better than Mill. I don't know. You get a plus action. You look at the bottom card of your deck. You may discard it, or put it on top of your deck. Then you get +1 card. So it's similar to Pearl Diver, except you're getting the plus card after you decide to either put it on top of your deck or discard it. And obviously, Pearl Diver did not let you discard the card. You would just have to put it back. So this is better, way better than Pearl Diver. And it costs 4, which is why it costs 4. But there's only 5 of these too. So there's not too many of these log cabins. And if a blizzard strikes, you might be tempted to trash this card in order to gain a gold, because it could be a while before you get to buy one later down the road. Who knows? But that is definitely some interesting cards there and events. Now, I also created another split file here as well. Not as good as or not as complex as the other ones, but this one's an action duration, and this is an action reaction. So there's only 5 of these, and there's only 5 of these. But we'll go over these in the next video.